Okay, I'd like to start the Planning and Works Committee. We do have a quorum and start with the declaration of pecuniary interest, if any. Seeing none, no delegations today. Oh, a motion to reconvene in open session, yes. Councillor Nowak, Councillor Armstrong, all in favor? That's carried. The consent agenda. There are a number of items on the consent agenda. Is there anything that anybody wishes to speak to specifically or have withdrawn from the consent agenda? Moved by Councillor Lorentz, seconded by Councillor Kiefer. The consent agenda, all in favor? Okay, so the first item under the regular agenda, we do have a staff presentation. It's the draft community climate adaptation plan for Waterloo region, and I'll ask Mr. Rogier to introduce that.
Well, yes, through you, Chair Galloway. This is a project that's been underway for some time with our community stakeholder partners, and Kate Hagerman, who's leading this process as manager of environmental planning and sustainability, may give a few remarks, opening remarks.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Galloway. We do have a quick staff presentation, but I wanted to take this opportunity to congratulate staff on getting to this major milestone in this project. It's been 2 years of consistent work with the community and our stakeholders to come up with this plan that really showcases the ongoing work that's happening in the community and our plans going forward to build the resilience community-wide in terms of climate adaptation and extreme weather response. I'm going to pass it over to Kate Daly and Nicholas Clowett to present, and if you have any questions, we should be able to answer them for you.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you, Chair Galloway.
This is your first time presenting to council in your new role, and I warned you, we can now turn the tables on you.
Into the lion's den. Thank you very much, everyone. So we are here to discuss the Community Climate Adaptation Plan. In terms of the plan for our brief presentation, maybe that's what it does. I'll just get a little closer. I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about community-wide adaptation and what that looks like and where this all fits into the climate change work that we're Thank you. Thank you. Hopefully able to hear a little bit better now. On the community side for mitigation, we talk about the current plan, but also that 2050 target for an 80% reduction in community emissions, and the work to plan for that is underway now. But we're here today to talk about adaptation. So that's about adapting to climate change, about reducing the impacts of climate change on us, since climate change is happening. And on the corporate side, we have ongoing climate adaptation work. There's some more details in your report that we're working on consolidating. Today's presentation focuses on the Community Climate Adaptation Plan, and that's really work that is being done more broadly with the community. And I'll also highlight on the corporate side of adaptation, we really do want to do a brief shout out. The cities of Cambridge, Kitchener, and Waterloo have all adopted their own corporate adaptation plans as well. So when it comes to community-wide adaptation, we're looking at items that involve people and groups from across the community. So no single organization has the ability to solve those particular issues. A good example is cooling and warming centers. So the region of Waterloo Public Health coordinates a group of organizations that provide cooling and warming centers, those include our local area municipalities, as well as other community organizations. So that's an example of where we need more than just one municipality or organization to address the issues involved in climate change. So I'll turn things over to Nick so that he can tell us more about the specific plan that we're talking about today.
Thank you very much. So the Community Climate Adaptation Plan really began with a local climate change study by the University of Waterloo, which we received in 2015. That study allowed us to identify 40 different climate impacts, climate impact being how a change in the local climate might affect our community, and there are a few examples up on this slide. So we gathered a variety of stakeholders from across Waterloo region to help us understand which climate impacts are a priority for the community to address with this plan, and to identify actions that could be taken to address those priority impacts. Should I be? Okay. And so we organized a community partners group. This was an interdisciplinary group of key stakeholders and local experts. They provided us with ongoing direction and their expertise throughout the adaptation planning process, including regional and area municipal staff, the Grand River Conservation Authority, and other organizations, including community services providers, REAP Green Solutions, the local utility companies, and a variety of others. We also, in addition to that core group, we also reached out to other important stakeholders with separate meetings or interviews, which helped to provide us with a deeper understanding of some important perspectives on different climate-related issues. And we also engaged the broader public with some surveys and with a public forum. So we've been following a 5-stage climate adaptation planning process to guide the development of this plan. It's a process that municipalities across Canada are also using. And an important part of this process, as I mentioned, is to identify which impacts represent a priority, a higher priority for our community to address. And to do this, our community stakeholders contributed to vulnerability and risk assessments, which helped us prioritize about half of the original 40 impacts to be considered in the adaptation plan. And so with those priority impacts identified, our stakeholders also helped us brainstorm potential actions that could be taken, and our community partners group helped us to consolidate and revise these actions into our current list of 36 actions, which are in the full plan and in the plan overview. So our draft plan is in 2 parts. Part 1 covers the process that we followed and provides some other contextual details. Part 2 includes those 36 actions, most of them in standard tables, providing information on some of the ideas that we received from community members, current practices that are already underway throughout our community to improve our resilience to certain impacts, as well as potential partners and next steps to consider in implementation. So there's an 11-page plan overview included in the information package, and the full plan is currently available on our website. We are planning to seek feedback now from the broader public, from stakeholders that we've already engaged in this process, and we are also presenting to area municipal councils before October 7th. And that gives us enough time to incorporate any feedback that we receive into a finalized adaptation plan by November 5th, when we plan to return to council with that final plan for approval. With approval, we would begin implementation, and one of the first things we want to do is to reconvene the community partners group. We see that group continuing to play a key role, in particular providing ongoing guidance on implementation and monitoring of this plan. And we can talk more about implementation when we bring the finalized plan to your attention in November, but essentially, just as the creation of this plan has been highly collaborative, in the implementation of it as well will be collaborative and a cross-community endeavor. So that's the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for having us, and Kate and I are here available for questions right now, or afterwards if you have further questions or feedback, we'd be happy to receive that from you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kate and Nicholas. So are there any questions of staff in regards to this? Councillor Schatz.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. And I think you addressed this in some measure in the report, but I guess one of my concerns with climate change is how we project into the future where we're heading, and particularly when you talk about infrastructure types of things. We can do emergency planning, and that can be fairly fluid, but the infrastructure piece is really different. And I often get the comment back that there are provincial standards, and I wonder if the provincial standards are really keeping up and adequate, and how much leeway or how much do we go out on a limb to look past that or forward?
I think there may be those in our department who might be in a place to speak about a bit of the broader picture beyond the scope here. I think one of the things, and I'm fairly new to this project, but Nick's been on it for a long time, and I think one of the things that's been neat for me to see coming in is just how much work is underway here at the region, at our local municipalities, even in other organizations who participated through the community partners and others groups. So I think there is a lot of attentiveness to the kinds of changes that are needed, and these are some next steps that have been sort of identified to try to bring those together, harmonize them when we can, and encourage and support each other in doing them. I'm not sure if there are items on the kind of broader infrastructure piece that might be relevant.
Yeah, Thomas or our colleagues in TES might be willing to have a chat on this one. I think the question is specifically related to the tension between provincial standards for, particularly for engineering public works, and the evolving requirements to meet different imperatives derived from climate change, right? More severe weather events and so on. I don't know if Thomas or Steve, you want to deal with it?
I think a lot of that we are already looking at it, and a lot of the infrastructure, storm sewers, things like that, are actually local municipalities' infrastructure. We would definitely be looking at it from the perspective of water supply. Is our water supply being impacted? And we are actually preparing a report. I'm not sure whether it'll be September or October, looking at the condition of our aquifers, which believe it or not, have actually been rising in level for the last 10 years. We think largely because climate change has resulted in less frost in the ground in the spring, in the fall. So when there is rainfall, it tends to infiltrate. So our water system is probably actually becoming more resilient, combined with the water use bylaw we have in the summer, which is reducing the actual usage. So there are a lot of things that we're doing, but quite willing to look at anything to improve on that.
Thank you. That's helpful, and I understand a lot of the infrastructure is more the local municipality, and I guess I was just looking for some kind of, and maybe my question was a little bit rhetorical in that sense too. I know that it's hard to project into the future, but looking if there was resources that the lower tiers could also use in projecting how things might need to roll out in the future.
Kate or Nicholas?
Yes, I can add something which is included in our detailed plan. There is a Regional Public Works Commissioners of Ontario working group, on a subgroup on climate change, which is looking into best practices and processes around climate change and infrastructure. I believe regional staff have been involved previously and are continuing to stay informed with this group. So I think that's one way for infrastructure to gain some I guess new best practices, or to stay up to date with the confluence of climate change science and the needs of infrastructure.
Thomas?
So I am a member of the Regional Public Works Commissioners of Ontario group, and that subcommittee on climate action change was started by us. We do have regional staff that both sit on it and contribute to that group, and it is it is looking basically at the environmental and transportation infrastructure that all regional municipalities have. I'd be quite happy to have regional staff share whatever information we have with local municipalities.
Who's seat 31? Okay. So I take it that the White House wasn't involved in this particular this effort, and I say that a bit tongue in cheek, but climate change is global. We can do certain things to help in our particular jurisdiction. How do we deal with, and maybe this effort doesn't really deal with beyond our borders, because they're going to be those factors, those effects are going to be much broader than our boundaries. So if we're doing something here, but Wellington isn't doing something, or you know what I'm saying? Like, that's maybe not a good example. What coordination is there at a broader level for some of these things? Or is there any coordination at a broader level at this point in time? It may still be just early days in some of these efforts.
Well, I'll begin by noting that the full plan document does identify some of the things that we heard from the community that were beyond the scope of this plan, and the two most obvious examples of that were issues that really were very interjurisdictional. I believe global migration as a result of climate change, as well as sort of global food systems insecurity. At the same time, though, it is encouraging that we're hearing from the community in terms of thinking about these kinds of questions and where our efforts fit into all of that and what we can do. There are opportunities to certainly connect with other organizations and groups looking at areas as diverse as we're involved in the Clean Air Council. There are organizations looking at energy as well, and others that the region participates in. So there are linking efforts that are done to identify the work being done in various municipalities on the various aspects of climate change. And I think that the interest in those is certainly growing over time, and there are more opportunities becoming available. So it's certainly something we're watching and participating in where we can.
Well, one example I wanted to ask about, and is the Grand River itself. It's the source of our large part of our water supply, and yet we only control or have can affect its quality within our boundaries, but we share it with a whole lot of other people. I'm not sure if Helen can chime in on this, but is there a coordinated effort even in regards to the river and climate change? Because that's our water supply, or a large part of our water supply. Nancy?
Yes, there's the Grand River group, they created a Grand River watershed master plan. And when they did that, they had participants from all the municipalities who are along the watershed in the Grand River. And that, since the master plan was produced, and we have had a working group to continue with the mandate. They will be actually having a update report on the achievements of that master plan. But we do coordinate targets on wastewater quality and certain management principles as we work together in the working group. We look at things like treatment levels and phosphorus levels going into the Grand River. We've had spills and bypass best management practices that we work together on. And we also have, on the water side, water efficiency programs that we've coordinated and worked together on. So through the Grand River Conservation Authority, we have worked very closely with our watershed partners on various initiatives, including, of course, the Rural Water Quality Program, which has been around for quite some time and very successful program as well.
Okay, Kate?
Just briefly to note, if this is an item of interest, there are a number of actions in the plan that speak to working with the Grand River Conservation Authority quite extensively, so it's worth taking a peek at those as well.
The other thing I would note that, I'm sorry, got some other people here. Well, the other thing I wanted to note was that in our strategic planning process, which we are currently engaged in, we will be talking about a variety of things that impact with climate action, climate change. None the least of those would be, an emphasis on active transportation and a modal shift in terms of transportation. So that's another stream on this topic, but something that we'll be engaged in as well. Councillor Rabanovic.
Thank you very much, and I do want to thank staff for all the great work that's been done on this and getting it to this point, because it is an extremely important document. I noticed in the report you referenced FCM, but have we also been working with other partners like ICLEI and others in terms of some of this work?
Yes, indeed, and the process that was used for the development of this plan actually involved an arrangement with ICLEI.
The ICLEI process.
5 milestone process. So certainly they've been very actively involved in the development of the plan and providing feedback to us as well.
And just, building on what Chair Galloway was asking and pointing out, the piece around, I guess, neighbors and what they do. I mean, I think it is important, obviously, that we collaborate and partner. And I think one of the encouraging pieces is, even in a jurisdiction like the United States, quite frankly, it's cities that have been driving the climate change agenda in the absence of leadership from their national government. Mayors and others across the United States have really been driving it both in their own communities and nationally and internationally. FCM, in addition to the work that it does domestically, also is engaged in a global network that's partners between ICLEI and UCLG, which is the United Cities and Local Governments, around the global climate change agenda, everything from GHG reductions to dealing with climate change and adaptation and so on.
Councillor Jowett.
Through the chair, just wanted to add a couple of little things. 1 million people get their drinking water from our watershed, which goes from Dundee to Dundalk. But more importantly, with the collaborative efforts, certainly we meet monthly at Kettle Creek with many conservation authorities beyond our own watershed. And we also have a source protection group which meet regularly and deal with some pretty tough issues around climate change. And then, of course, I do know from my current position at GRCA as chair that many conservation authorities, even across the border into the U.S., look to Grand River Conservation Authority for best practices and technical knowledge. And I also know that Joe is going to be staying on with us just a little bit longer to help some of those conservation authorities to bring their level of standard in best practices up somewhat. So lots of good initiatives going on there.
Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, Chair. Good. Yes, listening to your discussion about if we do it and the others don't. But we always have to remember all good things start with one group and one people, and other people jump on. So we can lead or we can follow, but we have to move.
Good. Okay, there's a motion to receive the draft report and proceed to a public consultation phase. Councillor Foxton, Councillor Nowak, all in favor? It's carried. I would note that now that the public health staff have left, there's a candy bar now at the on the sideboard for your enjoyment. Thank you to Councillor Fox. No, Chair Redmond. Oh, she's got candy in her office too. Did you not know that? Well, I saw you setting it up, so She delegated to you. Okay, the next item is the proposed new regulations under the Planning Act. And I'll ask Mr. Rozier to comment on that. Michelle's not here.
No, she's in hearing this
Okay.
today. Through you, Chair Galloway, this is a sister report to the one that Mr. Dyer presented this morning on the financial aspects or the implications of changes to the Development Charge Act as a result of Bill 108. This report is dealing with the planning matters contained in Bill 108 and the transition process or the regulations to implement those the new provisions of Bill 108. In general, we're supportive of the approach. We have recommended that the province clarify matters specifically around the grounds for appeal, and so that we can continue with the current set of appeals in a straightforward manner. But in general, the regulations meet with our support. We have forwarded a draft of this report to the province. We will support following Council's decision on this recommendation. We'll forward this on to the province for our final input on this consultation.
Thank you. Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you. Through the chair. You know, one of the challenges that I see in terms of the timelines, I'm not sure there's anything we can do about them, Rod, but the timelines is getting community consultation on key sites that are undergoing change. A good one example last night, City Waterloo. We saw a formal public meeting for a set of condos near the Herbsville roundabout. And we had an informal public meeting, a chance for citizens to first see that, January 2018. So from first receipt to the informal public meeting, and then informal public meeting to formal public meeting, was a year and a half. And they made that many significant changes to their site, right? So rushing it through in 5 or 6 months or that, you know, that's just not reasonable. We'd probably have to cut out the informal public meeting where we get a chance for citizens to look at it, and just because of council cycles. So do you see anything that we can do about that? That horses left the barn, now it's adapt and change and figure things out and just work on the transition part of it?
Yeah, so one of the challenging parts of Bill 108 is around the tightening of timelines for planning approvals, you know, I think generally, and perhaps John, I don't know if you would like to comment on this as well, but or Amanda, but I know that we think generally that it's going to be difficult, very difficult for us to continue to meet the timelines required by the new provisions, and we don't see a lot of flexibility on that. So, Amanda, do you have any view of how the timelines will be changed? Effective planning process at a practical level?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't really have much to add to what Rod has said. The province has essentially enacted these changes. They haven't been proclaimed into force, which is expected to occur sometime this fall. But I agree. I think it'll be a challenge to meet some of the timelines, especially in places like Waterloo, where you do have the informal public consultation process that happens. We are aware of it, and we will be looking at some of our internal processes to make sure that we can, you know, do the best that we can to meet those new timelines.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the information. I just think it's very, very difficult to encapsulate. We can do all the work at the city and the region and work with the developer, but to get that community consultation is just very disappointing. We've had people come last night who hadn't heard of it before, even though it's been in the newspaper and in media for a couple of years, and they're still just hearing about it now. So Anyway, thanks for the information, but very unfortunate.
Through Chair Galloway, maybe one other point here. John mentioned the efforts to coordinate planning approvals. So I think our planning heads group, chaired by Director of Community Planning, Michelle Sergi, is actually working on processes to streamline the planning approvals process. So, certainly on our end, we're trying to make it a quicker, more streamlined process so that whatever time is allowed for, public engagement is certainly provided for.
Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Galloway. Just further to Councillor Jaworski's point, currently we're looking at legacy OMB hearings. We're looking at LPAT and LPAT 2.0. So if you think that it was confusing for the public because it transitioned, there's now sort of 3 concurrent processes going to the fact where there are proponents that are withdrawing their appeals to see if LPAT 2.0 is more favorable to their initiative. So it is nothing if not confusing.
Okay, a motion there to forward the report. Councillor Jaworski, Councillor Shantz, all in favor? It's carried. The next item is Dundas and Maine. Recommended design concept, page 50 of the report. A couple of minor streets in Cambridge. They're not in Preston. Oh, Preston's in Cambridge, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, we've got Preston torn up, so let's leave Preston alone. Okay, so there's a recommendation here. There's no presentation. Put forward the proposed improvements. Pretty substantial project with a fairly substantial budget. There's no presentation. Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you. Through the chair. As you mentioned, it is very extensive, and in looking at the roadway, it seems to have varying widths all the way through it. And my question was on the cross sections. When you look at the cross sections, it's certainly all forms of transportation is supported, cycling is supported, except for the first cross section, which is Dundas North, Easton to Roxborough. And I think when I looked at it on Google Street View, it's a very tight spot. Even the sidewalks look very tight.
Yeah, I think staff have a response.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering what we can do it's always very unfortunate when bike lanes or bike infrastructure disappears while you're cycling, even though it just be for a little short path, but maybe wondering,
Greg,
what can be done?
Thank you, Chair Galloway, and thank you. The region has been looking, staff have been looking at cycling opportunities through that intersection as well, from Hespeler Road through. And we've got a couple scenarios. One we're looking at and we're going to be pursuing with city staff as well, going down Roxborough and Norfolk Drive. There's a drawing actually in the package there that identifies a little later on all the cycling connections that we've got in there. So we're hoping to capitalize on that and be able to put better cycling opportunities. However, it was outside the scope initially of this project, so.
No, very good. And I'm glad to hear it's encapsulated just on a sort of it's a safer route, what it sounds like, a safer route, less cars and more amenable to cycling. You just won't be able to use, or you could still use that Dundas Street North, but
you could.
You could.
You could. But we're hoping to divert people off at maybe Roxborough is kind of where we're targeting right now, which is a quiet, really quiet, kind of a dead-end street, and then there's some tracks and getting them onto more local road networks.
Good, thank you.
I'm really glad to hear that staff are looking at that kind of an option where we run out of right-of-way, but then there is some other option that may be nearby that may need some upgrading or some, which is outside the scope, may even be on a city facility, but still will move it forward in order to get a complete system, as opposed to having the last 100 meters or 200 meters without the facility that has been prevalent previously. So I really think that's a good initiative, because sometimes we just kind of, oh, that's it, that's the end of it, and let the city or somebody else worry about how that system is completed. So I think on these road projects where we do have that dilemma, then trying to find that off-road solution is really important. Okay, so there is a recommendation there, a rather extensive recommendation. Councillor Jowett, Councillor Kiefer, all in favor? That's carried. The pilot programs, the alternative transit delivery pilot programs have been tried. They're being recommended to cease at the end of this year for different reasons, and then a somewhat different recommendation for the Hespeler Village subsidized taxi service. Any questions on that? Motion. Councillor Urbanovic, Chair Redmond, all in favor? That's carried. The Drinking Water Quality Management System Program update. No presentation on this. Recommendation, there's 4 parts to the recommendation. These are statutory and in nature for the most part. Any questions on the report? Motion then to Councillor Clark, Councillor Foxton, all in favor. That's carried. No other matters. Nothing else. Yeah, Mr. Schmidt wants to refer to one particular matter on the council inquiries and requests for information to update that particular item. The low-income fare recommendation. Mr. Schmidt.
Sure. I just wanted to note that we are actually targeting having that report in September rather than October, or sorry, in August. It says August 19th, but we are targeting having that report in September.
And so that, not that we necessarily could have done anything or adjusted anything in time for the fare increase, but we were, I think, originally hoping that it would jive somewhat, at least the discussion on it would jive, and then I suppose proceed to budget for any consideration. Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. If I could just take a minute. I think I shared with council, and I just wanted to do it here. I've had a number of conversations with people in the community about transport trucks and safety of pedestrians on Arthur Street in Elmira. A couple of times, this is someone who has actually experienced it. She had to jump out of the way of a transport truck. She witnessed a young mother with 2 children that had to jump out of the way of a transport truck. And I just bring this to your attention again to emphasize the need for the consideration of a truck bypass. And I understand that it has been moved up, and I appreciate that has happened. And I know we have a lot of priorities that are going to be pressing on us in the next few years, but this has really been brought to my attention as a serious safety concern in town, so I just wanted to address that here. Thank you.
Councillor Urbanovic.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. One of the items I wanted to bring up has to do with buses and acquisition of buses, and in particular, whether or not we're pursuing more so looking at electric buses and some of the other things that would help us meet some of our goals in terms of the climate action plan. And I'm wondering if I don't know if you can touch on it now, or if it's something that staff can bring a report to a future committee meeting in terms of where we're at and what steps we're taking to move towards more energy-friendly public transportation to line up with our ION system.
I would suggest, Councillor Benedict, if you're okay, that could be the subject of a report for a future meeting. I think that could be a little broader as well in terms of not just what we're doing, but what are other people doing, and because there are a lot of transit authorities now that are going to electric.
Well, for sure, and that's what's driven the question from me is
right. So they can come back with that kind of research and documentation and what our views on that are. If you're okay with that,
yep, that'd be great.
I'd like to see that as a report at a future meeting, and so we can provide that direction to staff to come forward with that report at earliest convenience. Motion to adjourn. Chair Redmond, Councilor Nowak, all in favor? That's carried. Thank you.